Welcome again from me, Dave Coates. This week's material for retailing logistics from me very much builds on Cathy's introduction to warehousing and has strong links to the visit to the warehouse, which is an integral part of the coursework for this module. There are two parts to this week's material. The first part is about material handling in a warehouse, and there are some mini cases for this part. The second part is about warehouse location, and there is some simple arithmetic involved in that part. From Cathy's introduction to warehousing, you should be aware that the typical warehouse processes when picking goods for a store are receiving, put away, let down, picking, and finally marshalling and dispatch. You need to think about these operations, these processes, as you watch the video showing typical warehouse operations. This might be the first thing you do for me this week. And yes, this is a promotional video, so it does get off to a slow start. Apologies. Having watched the video, you also need to read the Introduction to Materials Handling in the Word Notes on Learn. As you read these notes, you should also think about those typical warehouse processes of receiving, put away, let down, picking, and dispatch. In those word notes, there is a selection of mini cases. Think about these mini cases. One particular focus of the mini cases is the idea of trade-off, which was introduced last week. There are spaces in the word notes on Learn for you to add comments about where more money is spent and where, hopefully, more money is saved. As well as the mini cases in the word notes, there is also a video mini case to watch. This mini case is about AutoStore's automated hive warehousing. Ocado will be using similar technology in their newest warehouse. What should you learn from these videos and mini cases, together with the material in the word notes on Learn? You should learn that different products and different priorities lead to different choices for material handling. And multi-channel retailing makes material handling harder and more complicated if a retailer decides to use the same warehouse for picking cartons of goods for stores and individual items for internet shoppers. The PowerPoint slides on Learn this week are mostly a summary of what is in the word notes on material handling. But the slides also contain some thoughts from me on the mini cases. On Learn, there are also links to extra videos you might choose to watch. These videos relate to material handling and the way different retailers make different choices. The number and location of warehouses is a regular question for retailers as their store portfolio develops. For example, Aldi and Lidl have increased their market share in recent years, and so they have had to decide where and when to build new warehouses. The word notes on warehouse location provide thoughts on the classical approach to warehouse location, together with thoughts on alternatives. For the simple example in the word notes, you might usefully decide to sketch a map of the various locations so you can picture the problem. The arithmetic is simply about how much product and how far it has to travel, giving rise to the classical term ton miles, ton for how much, miles for how far. The arithmetic is simple. For the example in the notes, moving 50 tonnes of product from Loughborough to Leicester, a distance of 15 miles, means there is a cost of 50 tonnes times 15 miles to give 750 tonne miles. And although it talks in tonnes, any other sensible measure is appropriate. For example, pallets, roll cages or cartons. But the idea is that we are building in the how much and the how far. In the notes, I have completed one example and left space for you to complete another example. You might decide to work through this part of the notes in your coursework groups to provide support for each other. One current example of warehouse location is the decision by the online fashion retailer ASOS to open a warehouse in the States. To date, online sales by ASOS to the States have been from their Barnsley, Yorkshire warehouse, but sales in the States are now big enough to justify a warehouse in the States. You might like to think through the advantages and disadvantages of their decision, having read all of the notes on Learn. Discussing your thoughts in your coursework group could also be helpful. And how might this material appear in an exam? A question on last year's Winter 2017 exam paper said, John Lewis Partnership have brought together much of their warehousing onto a distribution campus at Magna Park, Milton Keynes. Magna 1 handles smaller items, whereas Magna 2 is for hanging garments. Magna 3 is for bulkier two-man deliveries of items such as sofas, beds and televisions. The question asks you to analyse the advantages and disadvantages for John Lewis Partnership in having so much of their warehousing in one location. What the question did not ask you to reflect on, but you might like to reflect on, is the different material handling requirements of small goods and hanging garments and big goods such as televisions and sofas.